Hey Finxters! In today's interview question, we'll find the solution to a particular question which asks us to find the longest substring without repeating the characters in a given string. Let's have a look at a few examples to understand this question. Suppose the given string is S, and then from S, you have to find the longest substring. So let's move into an example. So as you can see in example 1, S is the string which consists of characters XYZ, XYZ, YY. Now, what's the longest substring without repeating characters in this case? It's XYZ. Now, immediately after that, we have X, which repeats itself. So, the longest substring in this case is XYZ. Hence, the length of this substring is 3. So, that should be your output. Now let's move on to the next example, wherein we have the letter K repeating itself 5 times. But what's the longest substring in this case, which does not repeat itself? It's simple, it's K itself, right? Because K is repeating itself 5 times. So the length of the longest substring is 1, which is K itself. Now this question says that S must be greater than 0. However, I have also taken an example wherein the string is empty, just for a better understanding. So when the string is empty, the output should be 0. Since the string is empty, so there's no question of having a longest substring in the given string. Similarly, in the fifth example, we have the word or the string tweet. And now if you look closely, the longest substring in this case is TWE, which is twee. So the length of twee is 3, and that should be your output. I hope you got an idea about the question. It is a very simple question. So let's dive into the solution and find out how we can solve this question optimally. Now, as I always say, to understand any question, the best way to do that is to visualize the question with the help of an example. So let's dive into the example and let's understand how the algorithm works. And after that, we will dive into the code. So this is the example that we are going to focus upon. Now note that we will be using couple of variables and initialize them to 0. Those variables are lon and another variable I. So lon and I both store the value 0 initially. Now you might be thinking, what is j? J denotes the pointer which marks the current element within the string. Now, to understand that, let's move on to the next phase of this discussion. In this algorithm, we will be using a dictionary. So, your first and foremost task is to initialize an empty dictionary. Now, as all of us know that a dictionary in Python is a data structure which stores data in the form of key value pairs. And this property of the dictionary is going to help us to reach our final solution. Now, we have to traverse through each element in the given string in order to extract the longest substring. And when we do that, we have to check for a certain condition within each iteration. And what's that condition? That condition is we have to check if the current element, which is marked by J, is already present in the dictionary. For example, initially when J is 0, we will check if T is already present in the dictionary. And we find that T is not present in the dictionary. And then we have to perform a certain operation, which I'll be explaining you very soon. So let's begin our iteration. This means initially the value of j is 0, which points to the element t. Now we check, is t present in our dictionary? Now note that hmap in this case is the name of the dictionary. So please don't get confused that what is this hmap? This is nothing but the dictionary that we have initialized. So is t present in the dictionary? No, it isn't. So we go on and store t within the dictionary such that t is the key while its index 0 is the value. Then we move on to another operation. And this operation is to find the longest substring after the first iteration. So after the first iteration, the only substring that we have at hand is t. So the length of the longest substring at this point of time is 1. But how do we tell Python to do that? Because as we proceed with every iteration, the length of the longest substring will keep changing. So to do that, we need to use another condition wherein we will be checking what's the maximum value between the value stored in the variables ln and the value stored within the result of the computation, that is j minus I plus 1. So in the first case, the value stored in ln is 0. If you remember, I mentioned in the beginning itself that we will initialize couple of variables which are ln and I, and both of them will store the value 0. So initially, ln stores the value 0. Now in the first iteration, what's the value of j? It is 0 itself. And what's I? It is 0 again. So 0 plus 1 is 1. And now what's the maximum value between 0 and 1? That appears to be 1. So now we update the value of the variable ln by the maximum value between these two values, which is 0 and 1, and that happens to be 1. So now ln stores the value 1. Now we move on to the next iteration, and once again we check if the element w is present in our dictionary, and we find that w is not present in the dictionary. So we go ahead and feed the value w in our dictionary such that w is the key and 1 is its value. Now our next operation is to check what is the maximum value when we compare the variable ln and the computation of j minus I plus 1. So let's go ahead and do that. And in this case, ln, as we see, was 1, while j minus I in this case is j is 1, while I is still 0. Now you might be wondering, we are not using I until now, then what's the use case of I? We will come on to that very soon, but for now, the value stored in I is still 0. So 1 minus 0 is 1 plus 1. So 1 plus 1 is 2. And what's the maximum between 1 and 2? It's 2. So now we go ahead and store 2 within our variable ln. It's time to move on to the next iteration. So j now points at the element e, which is at the second index. So this means the value of j is now 2. Now we perform the check again. Is E present in our dictionary? No, it isn't. So we go ahead and feed the value E in the dictionary such that E is the key, while 2, which is its index, is the value within the dictionary. It's now time to perform the operation wherein we find the maximum between the values. So we now check if the value at ln, which is 2 in this case, and then we calculate the value of j minus I. So this will be 2 minus 0, which is 2 plus 1, and that comes out to be 3. So what's the maximum between 2 and 3? Of course, it is 3. So we stored the value 3 within the variable ln. And now your question about the variable I will be answered when we move on to the next iteration. So let's go ahead and move on to the next iteration. Now j points at the element e, which is at the index 3. Then we move on to the next operation. We check, is e present in our dictionary? And now we find that yes, e is indeed present in the dictionary. So this means this if statement evaluates to true. And now it's time to play around within this condition and modify the value of our variable I. So let's go ahead and find out what is I storing. I stores the maximum value between current value of I and the value associated to the current key, which is E in this case, plus 1. So let me explain that. We will find the maximum value between current value of I, which is 0 as of now, and then we will compute the value stored within the dictionary that is associated to the current key, which is E. Now, what's the value associated to E? It is 2. So this is going to be 2 plus 1, which is 3. That means we are going to find the maximum value between 0 and 3. Now you might be wondering what's happening in this case. Now if you look closely, what's the element at the current index j? It's E, and now this is the name of the dictionary, while E is the key. So we are finding the value associated to E in this case, which is 2. Therefore, 2 plus 1 is 3. Now I hope this should be clear. So it's quite obvious that the maximum between 0 and 3 is 3. Okay, we are done with our variable I, and thankfully, we have finally used the variable I and stored a value in it. Now it's time to perform the next operation before we move on to the next iteration. And what's that operation? We now have to play around with the variable ln and compute the value of j minus I plus 1 and then find which is the maximum between these two values and then store that value in the variable ln. So in this case, the variable ln has the value 3, while j minus I in this case is 3, which is j minus I, which is 3 once again, as we found just now. So 3 minus 3 is 0, plus 1 yields the result 1. So what's the maximum between 3 and 1? It's 3. So this means 3 is greater than 1, which happens to be the maximum value between the two values. So we store 3 within the variable ln. Simultaneously, we also change the value of our present key within the dictionary, which is E. E was previously 2, and we updated it with the value 3. And what's 3? 3 is the value of j. Now we move on to the next iteration. And once again, we check, is P present in the dictionary? Yes, P is already present in the dictionary. So this condition evaluates to true. So we move on and make changes to the value of I, wherein we check what's the maximum value between the current value of I, which is 3 at this point of time, and then we go on to compute the value associated to the current key in the dictionary, which at this point of time is 0. So as you can see, the value associated to t is 0. Now a question here is, why is it 0? If you remember, we stored the value of t in the beginning itself within the dictionary such that t was the key while 0 was its value. So 0 is the value of t. So 0 plus 1 yields the output 1. So we are going to check what's the maximum value between 3 and 1, wherein 3 is the value of I, while 1 is the value associated to the key T in our dictionary. And once again, the maximum value between these two values is 3. So once again, I stores the value 3. Now we move on to the next operation, wherein we check what's the value of ln. Ln is once again 3. And then we compute the value of j minus I, wherein j is 4, while I 3. So 4 minus 3 is 1, plus 1, which is 2. So what's the maximum value between 3 and 2? It's going to be 3 once again. So this means ln will once again store the value 3 within it. Simultaneously, we are also going to update the value of our present key in this dictionary, which is t. And if you remember, t was previously 0, and now it stores the current value of j, which is 4. So t now stores the value 4. Now we have traversed through the entire string, and we have successfully found the longest substring which is stored within our variable ln. And this happens to be 3. So we finally reached the output that we wanted. And this is how this algorithm is going to work. So in short, we will simply traverse through the entire string, and then we will be checking if the current element in each iteration is present in the dictionary. If it is present in the dictionary, then we go ahead and update the value of I. And once we are done with the value of I, we move on to find the maximum value between the variable lon and the result of j minus I plus 1. Finally, the value stored in lon will yield us the output that we want. So I hope this algorithm is clear. And now let's dive into the code to further understand how this is working. So let's quickly go ahead and initialize our variables lon and I. So as I mentioned, the variables I and lon will store the value 0 initially. Now let's go ahead and create our dictionary. Now the dictionary is empty in the first case. So we are now done with initializing our variables. It's now time to iterate through a given string. To do that, we will be using a for loop. So this is our for loop such that we are iterating from 0 until the length of the string. To iterate through the string, we use for loop along with the range function. Now, if you do not know how to use the range function, please do not worry. I'll provide a link in the description so that you can master the concepts of the range function and other built-in methods in Python, because it is extremely important to understand how built-in functions in Python work before you can dive into more complex problems. So it is highly recommended that you have a strong hold on the basics before diving into interview questions. But I hope since you are already watching this video, then you must have an idea about how the range function works. Now let's move inside our for loop. Now, do you remember what was the condition that we were checking within the for loop? If not, let me guide you through that. So we were checking if the current element is already present within the dictionary. So let's go ahead and do that. There we go. And now what were we checking within this condition? So let me take you back to the presentation once again. So as you can see, this is exactly what we were performing within the if statement. That is, we were modifying or updating the value of I. So let's go ahead and implement this in our program. Okay, so we have successfully implemented the concept that we explained within the if statement in our code as well. It's time to come out of the if statement. And now, what was the next operation that we were performing? Let's go back to our presentation. As you can see, we were updating the value of the variable lon in every iteration such that we were finding the maximum value of ln and j minus I plus 1. So let's do that in our code as well. And there we go. We have successfully performed this operation as well. There was one more thing that we were following in every iteration. We were updating the value associated to the current key in the dictionary. So we have to take care of this condition as well, or this situation as well. So that you simply have to go ahead and update the value of the current key in the dictionary. Well, before I proceed further, you might have noticed that I used a built-in function known as max to find the maximum value between two given values within the if condition as well as within our loop, wherein we were updating the value of the variable lon. Just to give you a quick overview of what the max function does, let me demonstrate that with the help of an example. Max is a built-in method in Python which returns a maximum value between the provided arguments. So this means if you have a look at this example, I have provided the value 0 and 3 as arguments to our function max. So max shall return the value 3 in this case. Let's go ahead and execute this code. And there we go. As you can see that max returns 3, which is the maximum value between 0 and 3. So that's how useful Python built-in methods are. And once again, I urge you to go through Python built-in methods. And we have complete course on Python built-in methods on the Finxter Academy, which you can join as a premium member. And there you get to learn about all the built-in methods in Python with the help of numerous examples and questions. Okay? So I hope you understood what the max method does. And finally, we are done with our for loop. And once that is done, you simply have to go ahead and return the value stored within the variable long, which stores the length of the longest substring. To further understand this better, I will be using a few print statements within this code and then execute it with the help of an example so that you can visualize how this code is working. Now I know that you already visualized this with the help of the presentation that we saw previously, but I also want you to visualize this with the help of the code as well so that things are crystal clear and you do not face any problem when you face this question in your interview. So that's the code. And as you can see, I have used numerous print statements so that I can explain you things in a better way. And the example that I used is tweet, which is exactly the same example that we visualized in our presentation. Now let's go ahead and execute this code. And there we go. Now, as you can see, initially j is 0, which stores the index of every element in the string. So in the first case, when j is 0, the element is t. And as you can see, since t is not present within our dictionary h map, so we do not move inside our if condition. We simply go ahead and update the value of lon, and we also update the value within our dictionary. So the value of lon in the first case is 1, and the value of hmap, rather the data within hmap, which is the dictionary, is t, which is the key, and 0, which is the value associated to t. So let's cross check that with our presentation. And as you can see, t was initially 0. Then we move on to the next iteration, and the element is w, while the value stored in lon is 2. And now the dictionary stores the key value pairs e, which has the value 0, and w, which has the value 1. Let's cross check that once again. And there we go. As you can see, w is the key and 1 is the value. Now let's move on to the next iteration, wherein the element is e and the value of lon is 3, while this is the value stored in the dictionary. Let's go ahead and cross check if this is correct. And as you can see, that the dictionary stores the key value pairs e and 2, and the value of lon in this case was 3. So that's exactly what we got in this case as well. Now if you remember, when j was 3, we've updated the value of I. So as you can see, we now use our if condition. So when we move inside our if statement, we were simply finding the maximum value between I and the result of the value at the current key in the dictionary plus 1, which was 3 in this case. So if you have a look here, it is 3 and I is 0. So the maximum between these two values was 3. And then to make you understand, I purposely printed the current status of our dictionary hmap, wherein the value associated to E is still 2. This is because we have not yet updated the value of our dictionary. Now we end our if statement and we come out of it, and then we update the value of our dictionary hmap. And as you can see, the value of E now becomes 3 within the dictionary. Simultaneously, the value stored within lon becomes 3 as well. So let's cross check that. And as you can see, E now becomes 3 and the value of lon is 3 once again. Finally, when the value of j is 4, the element is t, we once again move inside our if statement, and now in this case I was 3 and the result of this computation comes out to be 1. Then we find the maximum value between 3 and 1, which happened to be 3. And once again, before ending the if statement, I printed the status of the dictionary hmap. As you can see, the value of t is still 0. And then we end our if statement. And as soon as we do that, we update the value of our dictionary hmap. And as soon as we do that, t stores the value 4 within the dictionary. So let's have a look at that. And as you can see, t now became 4. Simultaneously, the value of ln was once again 3. So ln is still 3, and that is the output that we finally returned. So I hope with the help of this dry run, you now have a clear picture of how this code is working. Before we wrap this up, let us go ahead and quickly execute the test cases to be super sure that our program is working. And before we do that, let us remove the print statements. Okay. And these are the test cases that will help us to verify the authenticity of this algorithm. So let's go ahead and verify that. And there we go. In the first case, the expected output was 3, and that's what we got. Second case, the output expected was 1, and that's what we got once again. The third case, the expected output was 8, and that's what we got. Finally, an empty string, so the output is 0. So this makes it clear that this program works for an empty string as well. Finally, this was the example that we used again and again to explain the algorithm, and the output expected was 3, and that's what we got. Also, if you look, we simply traversed the string from left to right only once. So the time complexity of this code is going to be n. That is, this code is going to have a linear time complexity. I hope after you have gone through this explanation, you can definitely solve this problem and crack your interview. That's it for this interview question. Hope to see you soon in the next lecture. Goodbye.